so we can get started. It is not
It
to run
works.
too late. But I want to thank everybody who's here for coming. We're very happy to put on this webinar for you. Elina brought this issue up to me recently about, the connection between, gifted, intelligent students who typically do well academically, but seem to have some level of struggle or distaste in math, which I thought was just such an interesting topic. That I asked her to put this presentation together, and it's lovely and it's very cool. For those of you that don't know us, we are a part of the Center for Identity Potential, which is a counseling practice that works specifically with gifted, talented, exceptional, complex kids. We also have things like academic support, executive function support, parent groups, all these kind of things that are tailored toward the gifted. And this webinar is no different. And so we're tailoring some of our academic support and understanding specifically to this topic. So Elina here is a mother of a gifted child, is gifted herself. I hope you don't mind me saying that. Is a former engineer and a lover of math and geodes and rock collect. I mean, just she's this wonder of a person who has a lot of passion for what she teaches and what she does. And Elina has a very special knack for working specifically with gifted, asynchronous, complex kids and helping them really understand math at a foundational level, which sometimes is skipped, and I'm sure she'll talk about this in her presentation, at the institutional level in school many times. And so she really bridges that gap and does a wonderful job of that to help kids really understand math at a core level. And she's going to give a little talk with us today about some of the elements that go into that struggle and why that issue might come up in gifted kids. Am I missing anything, Elina?
No, that's about it.
Okay,
I'll
cool.
I'll cover the details as we go on.
Last thing, this is being recorded, so if you have any issues with that, please send a message to me privately, or if you don't feel comfortable asking questions on the recording, that's okay. You can always email us later or send us messages later, and we can answer those privately. And then this video will be posted onto our YouTube page after we're done, so you can either rewatch it or share it with others. Yeah, so if there's any issues with that, please let me know as well. But that's about it. So I'm going to let Elina take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Just thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Look forward to sharing this with you. So let me, Mark already took care of most of the introduction, but my name is Elina Hayosh. And in my previous life, I was an electrical engineer. And then I had a kid, and I stayed home to raise that kid. He's an adult now. And in elementary school, we hit a snag. So the silver lining to the snag is that it prompted me to seek answers. And I actually went back to school and I got my degree in gifted education. And I've been teaching ever since, about 14 years now. So let's talk about why you're here. Guessing not because things are great. You're not alone. I know that every situation is different. Every family is unique. But given that, there's still some common challenges that kids like ours face. And that is what we're going to talk about today. That is what we will address, what those are and how we go about fixing them. So before we start, kind of a bit of a roadmap of what we're going to cover. You're here. You're here because your brilliant child is struggling. And you want to know what you as a parent can do to support your child. And you also want to know what we can do, to help you. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about your concerns. We will talk about what the issues are, and we'll talk about what we can do as a team to solve them. Does that make sense to everyone? So far, so good? So there are two types of challenges that are common to gifted kids. Some of them are on individual level. Those are primarily due to your child's wiring. Some are more global on the institutional level. There is a bit of interplay between them, and I will talk about that as well. But those are the main types that we're dealing with. I will talk about individual challenges first, and then we'll cover the institutional ones. So this may or may not be a complete list, but in my practice, this is what I found to be the most troublesome challenges on the individual level. And again, I will talk about them in greater detail, but this is kind of to give you an idea of what they are. You have math phobia. You have struggles as they hit higher levels. You have leapfrogging, which is where they kind of get to the answer quickly and may not be able to show their steps. Skipping steps kind of ties in with that. Then you have word problems. I'll also talk a bit about the differences in math disciplines, geometry specifically. And then finally, the other one, the last one, is difficulty with abstraction. Let's move on. So you know your kids, right? So you know that the gifted kids are exceptionally attuned to the world around them. They act as emotional barometers, if you will. They're also very, very sensitive to shaming and humiliation. So if somewhere early in your child's development, a teacher or whoever shamed them, put them down for not understanding something, they will take that feeling, they will internalize that feeling, and they will forever come to associate mathematics with that negative feeling. So the result of that trauma is math phobia. Does that make sense?
Hey, Elina, can I ask a question
Sure.
here? Would it be in the same vein of like a question is sprung on them and they just don't seem to know the answer in the moment, and it's that same level of feeling, even like if the teacher wasn't intentional around it, is that still something that can happen?
It's similar. It's something that can happen. I've seen it most frequently when I get kids that are like middle school and high school, and they come to me and they're brilliant, and I know that they're brilliant, but there's like this hang up. And then when I start to dig deeper and just kind of talk to them, something will come up. Oh, I was in second grade and I didn't know how to do something, and they said this and this, and then I just didn't want to do it anymore. So
Gotcha.
so it's not something that I necessarily see showing up immediately. I get the results when I get them in high school. So that's what I'm talking about.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. The next one is struggling with higher level concepts. So when kids are young, gifted kids are young, early mathematical concepts come very easily to them. They're almost effortless because our kids are really good at pattern recognition. They're really good at spotting patterns, and early math concepts are all about pattern recognition. So this happens, they go along, and then let's say they hit high school, and they encounter something that they don't understand for the first time. And that rocks their world. It's a shock. They don't know how to react. They're not used to struggle. They're not used to perseverance. They're also not used to not feeling competent. They're used to feeling competent, and all of a sudden they're not. So they're going to feel ashamed and not getting something, and they're not going to know how to deal with those emotions, and they're going to come out in not such pretty ways. So they can either lash out at parents because parents are convenient targets, or they will become a discipline problem at school. Sometimes another danger is that they will shut down completely, because if I don't, something is difficult and I don't try it, well, then I didn't really fail. So that's a concern as well. So this, this struggle, or not being used to the struggle, it makes them feel unmoored. They feel like an imposter, and they don't know how to ask for help because things have come easily before. They don't know how to ask for help. So this is where their very giftedness is kind of working against them in a sense, if that makes sense to everyone.
You're pointing out something really, really key here, Elina, too, that I think is really important for parents to take away, where um, when you have a child who maybe in a math class is starting to show behavioral disruptions, or who is starting to shut down and or complaining that it's boring, that what you're basically describing is that is a symptom of the struggle,
Yes,
where
very much so.
teachers and parents and people who are in that kid shouldn't say he needs to calm down or she needs to calm down. It's more like, wow, what is going on that they're feeling that they're acting out? Something must be happening here. We need to evaluate, where they're at with the material itself, which is a really key thing that I think you're bringing up.
Absolutely. I had, if I can use a personal example, I had a child in one of my geometry classes a few years back, and all of a sudden it was a huge discipline issue, and I knew what was going on, but the principal of the school didn't. And I remember somebody had to sub for me, and I got an earful after the class was done, and because they didn't know that this is what was going on with this child. And I pulled him aside and we talked, and did not have issues with him after that. So it's, that goes, I'll talk about this a little bit later, because that speaks to level of teacher training that's necessary to deal with gifted kids. So, all right. The next one is, I love this one, leapfrogging. So leapfrogging, let's see if this sounds familiar. So you have a child, and the child has to do a problem. The child sits down, and you can see the smoke coming out of their ears, and then out pops the right answer. And if the teacher will ask them how they got to that answer, they may or may not be able to answer. And the reason is, gifted kids' understanding of concepts is often very intuitive, it's very deep, and it's lightning fast. So when you ask them to explain how they got there, to them, the ideas seem so obvious that they may not be able to break it down and show the teacher how they got there. So this is what can happen. Best case scenario is that they will get marked down for not showing their work. Worst case scenario is that they get accused of cheating. Either way, gifted kids are very, very attuned to a sense of justice. So an unjust response to that will result in either hatred of the subject or intense dislike of the teacher. So that is the result that I see. Personal example on this one, once again, when my son was in high school, he was in pre-calc. He ended up with a C in pre-calc because he would get the right answers on the test, and then he would get his points taken off if there was no work shown. So in our case, we were lucky enough that he actually liked mathematics, and he just kind of tuned out the teacher and did math on his own. But that may or may not happen. So also, one thing I was going to mention as an aside, yes, they can get to the right answer very quickly, but sometimes when you skip steps, that can lead to simple mistakes. And the teachers will often misinterpret those simple mistakes as a lack of conceptual understanding. So I will address that again when we get to the institutional level problems as well. The next one is difficulties with word problems. Word problems are kind of a special beast because word problems require a child to invest the time up front. They require a child to slow down, consciously slow down, analyze the problem, and translate it into algebra. So you got a few issues with that. Some kids don't want to slow down. They just want to plow right through and attack the problem. So that's one. Another one is that if you have a child, translating is a difficult skill. And if you have a child that has any kind of language processing issues, be it auditory or written, that translation becomes even more difficult. And then if you have a child that has executive functioning difficulties, they're unable to break, big thing into small chunks, then that problem, that's even more compounded. So what happens when you're faced with something, you're a kid and or even as an adult, you're faced with something that you don't understand, don't know how to tackle. It's like, it's a big scary beast. I want to run away. And so this is where you get the dread and the avoidance. And one thing we'll talk about how, when we talk about how we address that, is that the first thing that I tell my kids is make peace with that panic. That's the best thing you can do, is make peace with your panic, and then you can move forward. So any questions on this?
Again, feel free to put questions in the chat if you like, and we can address them there. And if we don't get to them in the moment, we can always put them together and email them, send them out. So, here's your chance if you have any questions at all, even if it doesn't relate to the specific thing Alina's talking about. It's a great opportunity still to get it recorded here so we can help you.
Okay. I see a couple, but I'm not sure what they are. So I'll let you handle
Well,
that.
there's people telling us the age of their children that they're
Okay.
here for. So we've got a 10 and a 6, and
Okay.
one of them says that the 10-year-old isn't used to not comprehending immediately, and so there's a
Yes.
frustration that goes with
Yep.
it.
Yeah. The with the younger ones, and I'll get back to that. The leapfrogging is huge with the little ones. When my son was in elementary school, his math teacher would like literally leave him alone because she was afraid that if she would disturb him, he would lose his train of thought and not be able to get to the end of the problem. All right, let's move on. So this one is geometry. Full disclosure, I love teaching geometry. Geometry was one of my own personal most difficult things to learn when I was a kid. It did not come naturally. And now I teach it and I absolutely adore it. So a little bit biased. So I teach a lot of geometry classes. The thing with geometry is that geometry has its own language. And it is absolutely crucial for, just like with learning any language, you have foundational blocks. And so it is absolutely crucial for this material to be presented systematically so that you establish a solid foundation. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing in the current geometry curriculum is it's haphazard as best. I mean, I have seen three-dimensional geometry given to kids before they learn parallel lines. I have seen algebra thrown in. I have seen probability and statistics thrown into a geometry class. What it's doing there, I don't know. But the point is that, gifted kids like to see things make sense. And if they're given this topic in such a haphazard manner, it's like mental whiplash. They don't get a chance to establish a foundation. Because there's no foundation, it's a pervasive struggle because they're constantly playing catch up. And so if there's pervasive struggle, then they're going to dislike the subject. And to me, that's a travesty, because geometry to me is the most real world of all the possible disciplines, because all you have to do is look around the room. You have to look at the roads. Everything that we have, so many things that we have are geometry based. So if your kid is at that age and they are having trouble with geometry, it's not necessarily your kid, it's the way it's being taught. Does that make sense? Any questions on that one? Not so far?
Nothing
Okay.
yet.
Okay. All right. This one, difficulty with abstraction. This one is a new one to me. This one is a newer problem primarily since the pandemic. And I seeing more and more of it. Kids are not comfortable with abstraction. They're not comfortable with algebraic variables. So if I have a class and I tell them that a times b is equal to 0, they cannot abstract that one of those has to be equal to 0. So, and if you have, instead of a and b, you have a, complex expression as a variable, then that becomes an even more of a difficult problem. So that's that. So that covers what I wanted to talk about for individual challenges. I see another question in chat. Anything for me before we move on to
We
this?
have a parent that has 12-year-old twins that are both going into 6th grade. And my reaction was just, God bless you. That was my reaction. But yeah, does anybody have any questions, or if you're willing to, you don't have to by all means, but if you're willing to share specific struggles that you're running up against, or maybe something that was covered as one of the individual struggles from a child, or something that makes you scratch your head and you can't figure out, now would be a good time. But if not, and you're just getting a lot out of this, that's okay too.
We're pretty good. It scares me because then I'm afraid that I'm being overwhelming.
Gifted parents love to be overwhelmed. You're
okay. All right. All right. So let's, in that case, we're going to move to the institutional level challenges. So the common challenges on the institutional level are often the result of teachers not being well versed in gifted, not being well versed in gifted characteristics, and falling prey to a lot of myths and misconceptions that exist about gifted kids. And these are the 4 big ones. The first one is really, really common, equating skills in arithmetic with mathematics. The other one is very rigid, do it my way or the highway, kind of approach to problem solving. No textbooks, I'll talk about that. And then specifically when you're dealing with neurodivergent kids, that's a big one. Not that many teachers out there who understand and have enough compassion to deal with asynchrony and neurodivergent kids. So the first one is equating arithmetic skills with mathematics. So one of the most common myths about this is that gifted kids, even mathematically gifted kids, are good at computation. And that is just not the reality. A gifted child's brain often works so fast, those neurons are firing so quickly that computation is almost irrelevant. It is drudgery. So what do kids do if they want to avoid drudgery? They're going to skip steps because they just want to solve the problem. And so when they skip steps and inevitably some errors result, that gets misinterpreted as lack of conceptual understanding on the part of the teacher. So if the teacher thinks that your child does not have conceptual understanding of what they're learning, they're going to remedy that by assigning more of the same. What happens when you assign more of the same types of problems that the child already knows how to do to that child? They're not going to want to do it. They know how to do it. So they're going to shut down. If they're going to shut down, they're not going to get right answers on whatever work that they're assigned. The teacher will look at it and say, well, they don't understand it after all. So often what happens is that the child will get placed at a lower level or not get moved up to the level where they need to be. And when that happens, then you get that vicious cycle starting all over again. Does that make sense? Does that ring a bell with anyone? Had to do a lot of advocating for parents, with my kids with public schools. And also, again, full disclosure, I love mathematics. I wouldn't be here if I didn't love mathematics. I can add 2 and 2 and get 5 with the best of them. And when I start a new class, if I get a new batch of kids, I always tell them that. I start out my first lesson, it's like, look, I'm going to do this too. And your job is to tell me if I make a mistake on the board and not let me stand there and, and just kind of move on with it. Does that make
We had a
sense?
parent share that you're describing their son's grade 3 year. Some days you get
Oh,
0 and some days 100. Yep.
yeah, zeros and 100s. Yeah, my own son's third grade years when I went to grad school. So I completely get that. Been there, done that. So, all right. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. Thank you. Okay, so the next one is rigid approach to problem solving. So I see math often taught as a set of rote rules to be memorized, to be followed, rather than something that's that is relevant and something that can and should be understood. Teachers will want the solutions given in a very, very specific, this is the box kind of a way. If you get out of the box creative solutions, they're ignored. There's a couple of different reasons for that. First of all, you do have adults that can be threatened if the child knows more than they do. And that's a real issue. Some teachers are threatened if the kid knows more. So that's one. Another one is that sometimes teachers themselves don't have enough of a deep, thorough understanding of what they're teaching, and therefore are not able to deliver it in a way that can be understood. So, and classic example of that, and I will talk about that if we have time at the end, is absolute value. And there's some interesting things associated with that. So if you do have an outspoken child, they will sometimes get penalized for asking questions or inquiring about alternative methods of problem solving. And if you have an especially bad connection between the parent, between the teacher and the child, they can even say, well, if you're so smart, then you should know this already. So that's a real concern. Does that make sense? Yes, no, maybe? Moving on. Okay.
Yeah, we have somebody saying, yeah, yes, it makes sense. And then somebody else saying, this is spot on for my kids. You're discussing all our struggles for the past couple of years.
That's why we're here. That's exactly why we're here. Thank you. All right. The next one is,
Actually,
this
do
is
you mind if I interrupt? Because this is a good
no,
one
not at
from
all.
one of the parents. So they say, we homeschool my 10-year-old. I've taken to letting him prove he understands, and then we skip ahead to the next lesson. I'm hoping it isn't a disservice, but he gets more frustrated if I make him do all the problems that are, quote, too easy. So not memorizing all the facts is actually okay? That's the question.
Absolutely. It
Yeah.
absolutely is. Because you want, an average person, I forget the number, an average person needs repetition like 7 times in order to retain something. Gifted kids maybe need 3. And if you make them do more of the same, they are just not going to want to have anything to do with the subject. So you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, we've actually been a part of school meetings where one of the accommodations that we request is that because the student could display mastery of the subject, but homework was such, I mean, torture really,
Yes.
that if they could just do every other problem, which was granted, and it was a lot easier on the kid because it wasn't this unnecessary drudgery. I like that word you used, Elena. And it certainly didn't do a disservice to the kid at all because I mean, what's education for if not to develop mastery and understanding? And if they already have it, what's the point of
Exactly.
pressuring them into that kind of work?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, this one is, kind of a newer one for our day and age. Textbooks have largely disappeared from our schools. If your children are very lucky, they will at least get an electronic copy on their iPad, on their school computer. In most cases, they will only get worksheets. So, the benefit is their spines are not breaking anymore from the weight of the backpack. So that's a good thing. The bad thing is there are no longer any reference materials for them to establish context, to look things up as necessary. Everything is like, this is your worksheet. There's no place for them to look things up as they need to. And this is especially harmful for visual kids. Visual kids need to see something in black and white in order to retain it. They need to see the concept on paper in order to be able to retain it. Think of it like if you're at a party and you're meeting somebody for the first time. Are you more likely to remember their name if they have a name tag or if they just tell you what it is? So it's a similar kind of a dynamic. Also, gifted kids, and actually specifically, boys in my experience, work best by working through examples. And textbooks are an invaluable tool because you will have a lot of examples that they can work through and analyze the problem that way. No textbook, no way for them to do that. So that entire tool is taken away.
I have a really good scenario here. The person's daughter gets excited about little higher level math, but then doesn't want to go any further. She learns most of the concepts herself, but after understanding, she doesn't want to practice. Like other gifted kids, she wants to give answers immediately or just tells answers without showing any work.
So that's leapfrogging, right? So what I do, so this one, it depends on the age of the child, and I will talk about it more when we talk about how we solve that problem. Especially when they're young, I don't press it because you want them to retain that sense of excitement about the subject. You want them to keep the love of the subject. So somewhere down the line, we'll talk about how to kind of get them to explain how they got there, by getting a buy-in from the kid. And I will talk about that in a bit. So save that question for me. All right. And this is a big one. This is when you don't have understanding, from the adults in your kid's life, from the teachers in your kid's life, they don't get understanding and compassion when dealing with asynchrony. So some of you have younger children, so I'm not sure how long you've been sort of like in the gifted land where you're coming from. But my favorite definition of giftedness comes from Columbus Group. And if you bear with me, I'd like to read it because I think it's a very good one, and it speaks to me. Hopefully it speaks to many of you. It says giftedness is asynchronous development in which advanced cognitive abilities and heightened intensity combine to create inner experiences and awareness that are qualitatively different from the norm. This asynchrony increases with higher intellectual capacity. The uniqueness of the gifted renders them particularly vulnerable and requires modifications in parenting, teaching, and counseling in order for them to develop optimally. Asynchrony is difficult for teachers to understand and deal with. Keep in mind that the majority of teachers will spend their days dealing with neurotypical children. They're used to neurotypical children. They will expect neurotypical behavior from neurodivergent children who are simply not wired that way. I don't have a bell curve in front of me, but if you picture, like my hands are a bell curve, right? So let's say this is the far end. The asynchronies increase exponentially when you're on that end. And the farther you are from the center, the greater the asynchrony. So the higher the IQ, the higher the challenges. One thing to keep in mind is that neurodivergence, I know perhaps some of you are here from the parenting, twice exceptional group. And twice exceptional is, it's a construct that sort of has two camps in a sense, but it's not really two camps, right? It's a spectrum. Neurodivergence is a spectrum. And what we want to do is we want to address giftedness and learning issues simultaneously. Did that make sense? Anything to add on that one?
Yes. Yeah, that's such a key point. But I'll let you keep going. I appreciate you sharing that.
I just, it's this one. I have to share a story. It's kind of a personal aside. Last year, I had a brilliant Asperger's kid in my class, just absolutely brilliant. Before he started in my class, I had several teachers at my school pull me aside and say, "Oh, you have so and so in your class. That's going to be such an issue. It's going to be such a problem, that we don't know what to do with him." I had zero issues. The kid was an absolute joy. All it took was some understanding and some compassion. The thing is that also happened in my classroom, because kids will, they will watch what the teacher does and they will act accordingly. I modeled what to do for them. My other kids were better as a result. They became more compassionate. They accepted him as one of their own. And to me, that was absolutely huge. And the solutions that this kid came up with, I've been teaching geometry for a long time. I have never seen solutions that I saw come out of that kid. They were brilliant and they were completely out of the box, different. And it was a blast. It was a joy to be exposed to that kind of creativity. So,
and for you parents out there, what Alina's describing is how you work within a system or with teachers or even with yourselves to create context around the behavior and the activities of these gifted asynchronous kids or 2E kids, whatever you want to call it. Because that's really what matters. If you put the right context to it and show the compassion through understanding, oh, I see what you're doing here. Oh, okay. You're going around it a different way. And that level really allows everybody to work more effectively. And Elina just does that naturally. But it's really you can always learn this. You can always learn how to create a context for teachers so that they're understanding your child better. But it starts with learning information like this so that you can have that foundation to start to explain and advocate for others.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay. So this brings us to where do we come in? It's actually kind of ties into what you were just saying. We get gifted. We understand it from inside out. What we will do here. The goal is we will equip your children with the tools that they can use to solve the issues on the individual level. And we will teach you as parents to successfully advocate for them on the institutional level. So these are the elements that will get us there. Hopefully you understand the issues a little bit better. And I know it's a lot, and we're here to answer any questions that you will have going forward. But at least we covered what those issues are. So now what we'll talk about is how we can address solving individual challenges, how we can use your child's differences and learning styles to their advantage. I will also talk about some of the unique aspects of math domains, algebra and geometry, and how they play into the equation. And finally, we will talk about guiding you, working as parents to informed and successful advocacy on behalf of your child. The key piece here is that we need to meet your child where they're at. Every situation is different. The rest will depend on specific issues, but we have to meet your child where they are right now. So, and we'll stay here, and I'll just talk about some of the individual challenges that we talked about. I'll start with math phobia. The key here is, because it is trauma, you want to start small. You want to figure out what the roadblocks are. Are there foundational difficulties, or are they holes in the wall, or is it a shaky foundation? So once we figure out what we're dealing with, then we can address it. We can work with your child to fill in the gaps, and we can work together to establish a solid foundation. What we offer here also is one-on-one instruction. Your kid will be working with me one-on-one. And one-on-one means that they can ask any question and they don't have to feel ashamed. They're not showing off in front of their peers. They're not held back. They can ask anything until they get clarity. So there's freedom from external expectations, and they can finally get to where they need to be. One thing that I always do with the kids, gifted kids like puzzles, right? So if you get them to see a problem as a puzzle, as a solvable challenge, then you can engage them that way, and you can build on every one of those little small victories. You build on that until there's no fear anymore. So that's what I generally do with math phobia. The next one is, I'm sort of grouping leapfrogging and skipping steps and arithmetic together, because there is interplay between them. The key is, for leapfrogging and skipping steps, you have to get a buy-in from your child. They have to see the value of actually slowing down and being able to explain their thought process. And with my older kids, I use my own example. Like I said, I was an electrical engineer, and when I was going to school, our finals were worth 75% of the grades, so everything wrote on that final. And for one of my classes, when I was a junior, the professor, we had no calculators. We're not allowed to use calculators. But if you spent pages and pages on analysis and you got to the end, if you solved the problem correctly, you had a nice round number. So I take my final, I get to the end, I have like 4 pages of work in front of me, and I get the ugliest decimal that you have ever seen in your entire life. And I fall apart. I mean, I'm 20 years old. I fall apart. I go completely ballistic. I call my mother. I go shopping because, retail therapy is a thing. And a week later, I get my test back. And I only got 5 points taken off. And I look at my test. And literally on the second or third step, I did an equivalent of adding 2 and 2 and getting 5. And that error in arithmetic propagated all the way through 4 pages of calculations, 4 pages of analysis. He was a good enough instructor, caring enough instructor, that he saw that. He saw that all the analysis was correct. And I only got points off for that little bit of error. So that's huge. So my kids generally like that story. And so they see it, and then I can get them to cooperate. So that's how I get the buy-in. Now, apart from that, there's some really, really useful techniques. If we have equations, for dealing with equations, I tell them to plug their answers back in. Their answers work, great. If not, that means they made a mistake. They need to figure out where they made the mistake. Common sense test. If you have a line that you expect to have a positive slope and you get your answer and it shows a negative slope, well, that means you made a mistake somewhere in the arithmetic. So common sense is huge. Getting them to figure out where they expect the answer to be and then looking from there. You know, my mantra in the class in my classes is ballpark it. Ballpark your answers. Sketch it. Even if you have algebra, use graphs so you know where you expect things to be. In a sense, get your senses, get your analytical and get your visual to help each other. So that's huge. So if you can visualize it, you can solve it. Also, I like to get I always want them to understand that they're not alone with their difficulties with arithmetic. And I'm going to send this in chat at some point, but there's a wonderful blog out there by Ben Orlin, and it's called Math with Bad Drawings. And one of my favorite pieces on the blog it's titled, "Why Are Mathematicians So Bad at Arithmetic?" And it is hysterical. It is absolutely hilarious, and it is so spot on. So back when I was, during the pandemic, early days, I would show it to my kids, and they would just laugh uproariously because they would recognize themselves and they would realize that it's a thing. They're not the only ones. And when they had that recognition, that's when I had the buy-in from them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think you're describing that it can really be, it comes back to meeting where the kid's at. If they have a sense of humor and you use a humor math site to get some buy-in, or you explain to them, look, we're just trying to ballpark it today. We're just trying to use common sense as a way to see if this is good. And I'm sure a lot of parents here, because the kids are younger,
Right.
they're probably dealing with this issue of, resistance and avoidance at home,
Yeah.
with work is my guess. And how do you integrate what you're talking about to maybe a younger crowd in a homework setting at home?
I think with the younger crowd, humor is good. With a younger crowd, especially when it comes to things that they can use common sense for, like equations, like look at equations as sort of like balancing the scale. Does the scale balance? Sketch it out for them. Make them visualize what they're working on and see if it clicks that way. Different tools. That's what I would do with younger ones.
Yeah.
Obviously it's different with older ones. It's easier and harder in some ways, but with little ones, it's getting them to relax, getting them engaged, and getting them to see it as a tangible thing. So does that
Yeah,
make sense?
use your example of absolutes, because that was always an interesting one to me.
Oh, that one is great. So absolute value. This is actually most absolute value often or most often than not is taught as this cookbooky method. So you have absolute value and what's inside the brackets has to be positive or negative, and that is how it's taught. But the key is recognizing that absolute value is distance. And it doesn't matter if you're going forwards, if you're going backwards. You're still covering the distance. And so once they understand that, then it clicks. And then it's no longer a rote thing. And it's actually I was actually going to talk about this a little bit more, even with differences in learning styles, right? Because this is where you use a graphical method of figuring it out, and use an algebraic, cookbook method, and you see how they relate to each other. Kind of didn't explain it as well as I wanted to, but I might come back to that one.
We have a question for you, if that's all
Sure.
right. I'm sorry if you mentioned this already, they lost my connection, but do you find spiral or mastery learning style works best?
It's a combination. Spiraling is good because with spiraling, you introduce the concepts, and then you introduce them, and then say maybe next year you cover the same concepts and you go into them deeper. So that's where I teach geometry, we use looping, spiraling method for geometry. So geometry is not like in standard curriculum, high school curriculum, geometry is taught in 1 year. We don't teach it in 1 year. We teach it over a course of multiple years. And so the concepts get introduced. And so you get this sense of familiarity with the concepts. So they have time to sink in and get established. Then when you revisit them, that part of it is solid. And then you add more complexity, and you just keep doing that. Does that, mastery to me is really good to, in figuring out where the child is right now, so they don't get bored out of their skull with repeating the same thing. But spiraling can be very effective.
Cool, thank you.
Does that make sense? The next one, one of the individual issues was word problems, and I touched on this a little bit. The very first thing that I tell my kids is that make peace with your panic. Accept that this is a natural reaction that you're going to have. Don't beat yourself up for having that reaction. Don't let anyone else beat you up for having that reaction. What we will do is we will teach your children to break things down. So it's, if a word problem is a big scary monster, we will teach them to break it down into manageable parts. We will also teach translation skills, so to translate, English into algebra. Once they learn those skills, then they can apply them. And every problem solved, it's like when they do enough of them, the next time they see an unfamiliar problem, yes, it's still scary. Yes, they can still panic, but they also know that they've solved it before. And now they can say, okay, well, let me think. And then I can move forward. Did that one make sense? I always tell them that, what, I've been doing this for a really long time. When I see a word problem that I don't know how to solve it right away. I get scared. And then I slow down and see what I need to do. And then the next one is when they encounter struggle for the first time. So struggle and imposter syndrome. This is a really, really tough issue to deal with, because so much of their self-worth is wrapped up in the fact that they are usually able to grasp ideas with ease. And so the first time they don't, it rocks their world. And the key there is as parents, as teachers, we have to acknowledge those emotions, those complex negative emotions as real. And while at the same time sort of help them navigate getting past them. And the way to get past them, just like with math phobia earlier, it's little bits, it's little successes that let them build until it clicks. And we do that, we try to smooth the path as much as we can, and we make the complex simple. That's the goal. Any questions on that one? And then the last one, as far as problems, is difficulty with abstraction. That's something that I mentioned earlier, where the kids are just not comfortable with variables. And I find that I like boxes. So I use colorful boxes. So here's your pink box, there's your blue box. And when they see it visually and it clicks, and when they see it on the board, it clicks. And I tell them, this is your box. You get to put, it's a variable, which means that it doesn't have to be a simple X and Y. You get to put whatever you want in that box, whatever expression, but the way you tackle it, the way you approach using that stays the same. And that seems to be very, very effective. Does that make sense? Makes more sense on paper than when I just talk about it, but hopefully you get the idea. So the next thing is when we talk about learning styles and using learning styles to their advantage. Some kids are more visual, some kids are more linear sequential. The visual kids will usually do better with geometry. They'll tend to do better with geometry, with algebra. Visual kids tend to learn best by examples. They don't like to show their work at all. I get it. But at the very least, I try to get them to, if they're in a classroom situation, or they're working, one-on-one with it, with me or tutor, get them to write the examples down so they can use them as references for later. And by the way, this is something, I realize that for a lot of you, your children are young, but I will tell you that going forward, even in college, Schramm's Outlines, it's a series of books that has a lot of worked out examples. Those are their friends. And any solution manuals for any class, those are wonderful too, because those are examples that they can use to analyze the problem in such a way that it makes sense to them. So that's something to consider and keep in mind going forward as the kids get older. Linear kids will tend to do better with algebra, and they are sometimes less resistant to show their work. So that's the easier part. But in any of these cases, you want to show them, you want them to be able to use all of their senses to help each other. So if you have a kid who's stronger in algebra, I will have them graph, their equations. I will have, I will try to sort of develop that, more of the visual aspect of their brain in that way. So the idea is you want things to play well together. So does that make sense? Any questions on that?
And you're really touching on the asynchrony piece, to where you can have a kid who takes a neuropsych evaluation, and they find that their processing speed with visual content is in the 99th percentile,
Right.
but their processing speed with something auditorily is in the 8th percentile. That level of asynchrony, where one is so much more developed than the other, that you need to be aware that maybe you have to switch the context so that they can process the information and they don't get overloaded. And so that is a really key point of why it's so important to, again, meet them where they're at, but to also lean on what it is that works for them, so they don't shut down.
Exactly. Next
I have
one
another
is,
example from a parent here who says, sometimes I see my son making things harder to understand. He's 2E, gifted in ADHD. And I asked for an example. She says, for example, when we were learning the times tables, 4 times 8, we tried to break it down into 4 times 4 equals 32, and then you double it. Well, 16, then you double it. But he will say it's 4 times 10 plus 2 times 4, which is not a conventional approach. So I guess in a sense, it seems to be harder, but maybe for him, it's not harder.
I think so, in a sense that he's distributing without realizing that he's distributing. Kind of like making, so making a bigger box and then taking something away. So it's a different, it's not necessarily harder if it makes sense to your child, but that's something that I would know better if I actually,
Yeah,
work with a
right.
child. See, so it's a little, it's from the way I understand it, it's basically he's making a bigger box and then taking something away to make a smaller box to get the answer that way, which is perfectly valid. I mean, it's kind of a cool way of doing it, but it's just a different way. So, and this is where, again, acknowledging that their solution is valid is so important, and not telling them, okay, this is wrong. This is not the way you do it. You, excuse me, you acknowledge it, that this is a different, unique way of doing it. And especially when they're young, praise them for it, because it's creativity. It shows it's something to be celebrated.
And another thing that I could add on to that and when you as a parent are able to celebrate it, but they say, but the teacher doesn't like it, right? The teacher said it's wrong. And sometimes it is a matter of helping children understand that is a part of sometimes how school is, and that it is what they're up against, but it does not take away their ability. And so you as a parent have power to override some of that. And even if they don't accept it from you in the moment, they're still taking it in that, no, I see what you're doing and what you are doing is correct. However, we live in a school system where you will get points off for it. And sometimes they have to be reminded that school is a bit of a game and you have to learn how to
Yep.
play the game, you know, sometimes.
Yep.
But to Alina's point, it's still making them understand that they're getting it and it's working and they're having a connection with that math and that problem, which is important.
So
We have a couple
that's,
questions if you want me to go into
yeah,
those or
yeah,
yeah.
please.
So one of them was, how do you determine where kids are at and what the driver is for their struggles?
That's going to depend on individual situation. That's a really global question, and that would have to, it would require a one-on-one meeting, seeing the child, figuring out where they are.
Well,
That's
and
not
it
something.
depends on the complexity because really what you need to do is there's so many variables to look at. I think is what Alina's been pointing out this whole time of all these different, whether it's trauma, whether it's their step-by-step approach, whether it's, computational frustration. And to have somebody go, sometimes you can figure that out on your own and you can go through it and understand what the issue is and start to see. And then again, your goal is to make that issue explicit so the child understands they're not quote unquote bad at math, but there's this part of them that's really, maybe underdeveloped compared to others. And how do we make it less painful and more fun? Da 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 da. But if it's so complex and nobody's getting any help and it's getting frustrating and it's getting worse, then yeah, you need somebody who knows this stuff backwards and forwards to sit with you and get some help in the issue because you don't want to have them shut down on their connection with something that they actually do enjoy.
Yes, absolutely. And like I said, and it's every situation is going to be different, and it will depend on all the variables that are involved. Excuse me.
Let's see. Regarding processing speed, the neuropsych exam our son went through didn't break down processing speed into smaller categories, visual, audio. That's common. how do you get that type of testing? It seems like that would be super helpful in figuring out how to teach him math and advocating for him at school.
Processing is a big issue. You know,
Yeah,
when they're and a lot of times, you know, what happens if you have a child whose general intelligence is way the heck up there and their processing is down there. That's, I mean, that's another difficult one to address.
right.
And
It's
you would
that
have
gap
to,
that really, yeah,
it,
causes a lot of that.
yeah, that's, we dealt with that in my own family, with that kind of situation. And it was not easy because this is the case where the teacher cannot grasp how a child who's that intelligent can be so slow in so many other ways, or can forget to do their homework. If they do their homework, they can forget to bring it in. They can zone out. There's just so many things. I think especially with kids with executive functioning or ADHD issues, what happens is intellectually they may not be challenged enough in their school setting, but logistically they're getting overwhelmed with the amount of work, with the amount, and in case of math, the amount of computation, the number of problems that they have to do, and they just can't deal with it. It's too much, and they shut down, and that's a real concern. Anything else on that before I move forward?
Any other questions? These are really good questions, by the way.
Thank you.
Seems like we're good for now.
Okay, all right. The next one is understanding the distinctions between mathematical domains, you know, your algebra and geometry. So the thing is, they're both valid and beautiful aspects of the discipline, but where in algebra, you will usually have a single correct answer, and you will have a limited number of ways of getting to that answer. In geometry, you can have many correct answers. You can have multiple ways of getting to that answers, and you can have an infinite variety of proofs. So for us, it's incumbent on us to celebrate that creativity. And what I also teach the kids is that I teach them to defend their approach. It's something, so that is something, it's more than math, right? Because that is something, being able to defend their ideas, that is something that's going to serve them well in the long run, regardless of where life takes them. So we teach them to celebrate that creativity and show, and you know, I ask them to show me different ways of solving a problem. When my son was in geometry, his goal was to come up with an answer that was different than the teachers, different than the textbook, and hopefully different from anybody else in the class. So that's how creative kids get their kicks, in a sense. So the key here, because they are distinct disciplines, is you want to encourage a symbiotic relationship between the two. And this is where actually it was, you know, getting back to absolute value, it's going to become like my little mantra. This is where I really wanted to talk about it. Absolute value is distance. Doesn't matter if you go forward, doesn't matter if you go backward. You're still covering that distance. That distance can never be negative. So if you have, so once you understand that, if you're faced with a problem, and let's say you have the ugliest expression ever with as however many variables inside your absolute value bracket box, but it says whatever is in there, whatever complex beast is in there, is equal to, say, -12. If you have blinders on, you're going to plow through and try to solve that problem using the cookbook method. But if you understand it conceptually, visually, you're going to look and say, okay, it's distance. It can't possibly be negative. There's no solution. So did that make sense? So that's why I like to use that example a lot. And then finally, that brings us to the last thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is successful advocacy. Some of the issues that you're dealing with in your families as parents are squarely due to your child's wiring. Some of them are more global, more institutional. When you understand the challenges on both levels, you're much better equipped to be an effective advocate for your child once the need arises, and it most likely will. As a parent, you know your child best. So once you understand the issues, you can work with the teachers to get them to understand the issues. And so you can think of it's almost like a three-pronged approach. So there's your child, there's you, and there's us. And we can all work together to make sure that the math education fits your specific case. It fits your unique child. Did that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's wrap up kind of what we covered. So your child is struggling or is resistant to mathematics in some way, shape, or form. We understand what the issues are. We understand the implications of those issues on multiple levels. We will help you and your child to understand what those issues are, and we will empower you to solve them. And as I've said before, this goes way, way beyond mathematics. It's in the context of math, it's taking your child where they are, knowing where they need to be, and getting them there. And the goal is to build their confidence, not just in mathematics, but beyond. So hopefully to last a lifetime. And now we can completely open the floor to Q&A and go from there. And thank you again. Thank you for your questions. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Elina. And yeah, if there's any other questions, Elina was able to touch on a lot of things and can, obviously has to cover a lot of material in a very broad sense. But if you have something more specific, you can either reach out to us through email, you can reach out here, whatever it takes. We just want to make sure that you're getting your concerns addressed on some level or another. And then Pam said, thank you so much. Excellent.
So we're here, and we're here to help you and your child, and that's the goal.
And we've seen it all.
Yes, we have.
Yeah, there's nothing you're going to throw at us that we're going to be like,
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
We've lived it, experienced it as a parent. All the things that we talked about today, all the things that I've, like I said, either lived it, experienced it with my kid, or I see it in the kids that I teach.
This was super helpful. Thanks for offering this talk. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, feel free to reach out to us. You can go to our website, centerforidentitypotential.com. You can read more about Elina there and her work. You can also reach out to us directly, and we can get back to you if you're interested. And it doesn't have to be you even, we're just interested in what you need. That's really our main goal here.
Yeah. Like I said, we are here to help, and we have seen it. And your kinds of children are especially near and dear to our hearts. So
we'll go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you again, everybody that attended. Will this be available to watch later? I had to miss the first 15 minutes. Thanks so much for offering this session. So helpful, and for your compassion. So yes, we will be posting this on our YouTube channel, on Center for Identity Potential YouTube, and you can watch it there to make sure you caught up on what you missed, or to go over things again. But yeah, for sure.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making time for us, and hope to meet you, many of you soon. Thank you so
Likewise.
much. Oh, we have a new one.
Thank you.
Thank you.